right, welcome back to the LCC channel. This is segment number 2, where we're going to be talking about implementing signals. And I apologize in advance. As of right now, we are not going to show any CDIs in here. We're just going to talk about the setup because there's a lot to do and a lot to get sorted out before we even start implementing signals. The last segment we talked about, we looked at the reasons for signaling and some of the different systems out here. But what we're going to talk about this time is why do it in LCC and what are the things we have to have set up on our layout before we start programming. Okay, so is there anything more inspiring than to watch a train roll by and watch the signal flip as it goes by? It just has this great response, isn't it? It's pretty neat. So if we have that, but we can add on to it a functional element, how much better, okay? So why would we want to do all this in LCC? Well, it's highly customizable. So whatever layout you have, whatever schemes you have in mind for your layout, it's very likely, it's probably pretty straightforward to do in LCC. You can model a specific prototype. You can model a specific prototype signaling system. You can really have some specific things for your particular yard arrangement or yard throat arrangement or some sort of track arrangement on your layout. All the logic and all the drivers are local. You can program it in incrementally. In other words, you can get yourself a node today or tomorrow, add it in, and then in the future, when you have, the time or finances or whatever, you can add to it very easily. It's incremental. And again, it's a very realistic system. So let's go through real quickly some basics, though, that we need to keep in mind. And number one is do your homework first. Don't just dive in, start putting LCC nodes all over the place and wiring them in. Without some planning, you're going to run into some dead-end streets, and that's not necessarily a good way to start. It'll create frustration, and it'll just be something that'll be a bad experience, right? So what we want to do is take some time and plan through, and I'm going to show you what I did on my layout, and something that you might want to consider as well for yours, is to plan out where you want signals and how they're going to function and what their purpose will be. Okay?
Okay.
As a part of that, we're also going to want to make sure we spend some time figuring out what standards we're going to use. What does red, yellow, green mean? What does red over green mean? What does red over yellow mean? All these things have different things that they can convey.
What?
In the last segment, we talked about how different railroads use different rules. What you want to do is before you start implementing it is sort of lay out what you want to do for your signaling system and what your standards will be that you want to implement. Okay? Number 3 is do one signal at a time. It's easy to just get ahead of oneself. These things are fairly complicated, but at the same time, it is doable. What I'm trying to say is the configuration really works around each signal, and if we just set up each signal to act independently, it is a very nice and very methodical way that we can get things done in a proactive way. If we try to interlink too many things, if we try to get too many parallel projects going, I think it'll be kind of something that'll end up hurting later on. Now that said, there is an element of these track circuits which we will address in a later segment here. So we do need to think about that, but I'll give you some hints on how we can leave space for that in the future. And then the last one is, I guess we already touched on it, is that each piece is not necessarily complicated, but the complexity comes in through the sheer number of signals, lights, and pieces of logic. In other words, in one junction you might have 3 signals. Each signal has 3 lights. Okay, so you're doing the math. There are 2 signals on one, may have 1 head, 2, or 1 might have 2 heads. So that's a total of 18 lights in just that thing. And each signal could have up to 6 aspects displayed. Now we're talking about 18 different configurations. So it just starts multiplying out. Again, if we take a step back, I think it works out better that we just simply lay out the schemes that we want, we implement them methodically, and then we do a good job of documenting that. All right. That's it for this. What I'm going to do is really quickly show how I set it up on my layout, getting prepared, and some basic rules that I set aside for implementing signals. So let me get Excel opened up and we'll move over there. Okay, so I've just opened up a spreadsheet that summarizes or it gives you an overview of my layout, the Great Northwest Band. This is the GNW's track plan, kind of in a schematic format. And what I've done here is that I've laid it out east to west so we can see what is in what relative relationship.
Okay.
So what I did here is followed a convention that many railroads actually do, is that you start numbering with odd numbers all your different control points. A control point being a place where you would have some kind of either dispatcher controlled or supervisory control, making sure that the traffic's being handled properly. In other words, a place where you might find a signal. So I started with odd numbers here: 41, 43, 45. 55. Now, when there was a space, where I had some gaps in distance, I don't know, I might want to add something here. So I jumped from 45 to 55 to give myself some flexibility here. Maybe Coyote Siding I want to do something with later on. And then here at 55, I got this control point, Coyote. I got a main yard here. Again, I skipped a few numbers because, again, I may decide I want to add some switches. I may want to add some crossings or some signaling. But basically, that's the Armstrong yard here. Again, you get outside of that, and you start having odd numbers head out as you get over to the staging yard over here. On the branch line, so it was really obvious to see what was going on, I started out in the 100s. So I know anything with a control point that's higher than 100 is on the branch. Does that make sense?
Yes,
So
indeed.
then there we started with 101 and went all the way up to 139.
I
So
love it.
that is the numbering scheme for the control points. Now, again, if you look at most railroads and CTC systems, they will actually use the odd numbers for the control points. And I don't know if you can read this down here, but then use even numbers for the signals associated with it. So, in other words, if I have this signal as control point here, 55, the signals around it would be the even numbers plus or minus 1 around 55. So it'd be a 56 or a 54 depending on what side it is. And that way you have those all grouped together. You can then further modify those designations with like an E for eastbound, a W for westbound. Some systems use L and R, left and right, to show on the CTC panel which way they're pointing. The other thing is you can add a suffix of the track number. So it'd be 55E1, which would be the eastbound 1 is track 1. 55E2 would be 55, it'd be 56E1, 56E2, which would be 56, would be associated with 55, but it's the eastbound signal on track 1 and track 2 respectively. Does that make sense? So that's the idea here. The other piece that we did want to talk about real quick is how to pick your signal aspects. I have here a worksheet that I've put together. In the last video I mentioned that I do enjoy the SP, the Southern Pacific. So I really just copied and pasted in a reference I found online for the Southern Pacific. Now keep in mind SP uses the GCOR rules, and RR circuits uses NORAC, it would appear. So down here, and I'll zoom in a little bit, are the various signal indications that I know I will be using on the layout. And what I did is I put down the GCOR rule and the NORAC equivalent, which basically would show the same system of lights. Does that make sense? So what this does is gives me a go-to as I'm getting ready to program my signals to know what I want to display. Okay? So before going any further with your plans on implementing LCC, I would recommend that you do the same thing. Go through your layout and start identifying the different nodes, the different control points, or whatever you want to call them. And then as a follow-on, go through and really decide what signal indications do you want for your layout, and document that, put it on a sheet, and have it handy, ready to go. All right,
Okay.
that's it for today, and we'll catch you next time.